Hello, fellow teachers, and welcome to this supplemental teaching activities video for Doctrine and Covenants, sections 20 through 22. And remember that the purpose of these videos is not to focus on commentary and insight so much, but to give you ideas, activities, and questions that you might consider using if you're teaching a Come Follow Me lesson this week. And also, the idea is not to use every idea or every slide or every question, but to pick and choose the ones that you feel are best suited to the needs of your students and your time frame. That being said, let's get started. Lesson number 1, How Firm a Foundation. Doctrine and Covenants, section 20. Our truth: the Church of Jesus Christ is founded on the essential, divinely established principles of authority, doctrine, duty, ordinances, order, and Jesus Christ. For the fire in the bones, this lesson gives us a chance to instill in our students a deep appreciation for the structure and the authority and the purpose of the church. Because there are so many in the world today, especially in the rising generations, that dismiss the need for organized religion. So here we can help our students to recognize that church isn't just about attending meetings. It's about being a part of a divinely inspired organization that provides them with stability, direction, and purpose. For an object, as your students identify and highlight the 6 different foundational principles that the church is established on, you're going to pull out a brick labeled with that particular principle on it. And by the end of the lesson, they're going to have that nice visual of a firm foundation of bricks that the church is built on. Now, if you don't have 6 bricks lying around, you could probably pick some up fairly cheaply at your local hardware store. And then for an icebreaker, there are a few activities that I suggested that you could do that would help you to introduce this key section in our study of the Restoration this year. And one of those suggestions was to challenge them to discover what the nickname of this section is. And to do that, invite them to unscramble the letter tiles here to form the word. And for a hint, you have them read the section heading. And there we learn that this section is all about church organization and government. So what do we call a document that represents the foundational principles of an organization, a nation, or a religious body? The word is Constitution. The nickname for section 20 is the Constitution of the Church. I'd go ahead and invite them to write that label right near the section heading. I also suggested that you show them the following picture and ask them if they know what significant event in church history took place in this very unassuming looking cabin. And the answer is that the church was organized here. It was the site of the first official meeting of the Church of Jesus Christ. And if you wanted, you could take your students on a virtual tour of the Peter Whitmer home where this event took place. And I'll go ahead and provide a link to the church website that allows you to do that. There's even an audio clip that you could press on while on the virtual tour that allows you to listen to Joseph Smith's description of the event. Or you could show them the following short video that depicts the organization of the church, and it's filmed right there at the Peter Whitmer cabin, which could also help your students to visualize the organization of the church. And then for a search activity, I do like to introduce my students to the scripture study skill of breaking a larger section into smaller parts. And one way to do that is to tell the story of Michael Latito, who is the man who ate an airplane by cutting it up into small pieces. Well, we can do the same with the scriptures to make these large sections a little bit more digestible. So you invite your students to draw lines between the suggested verses from the insight video. Now, I know that I just provided you with a lot of introductory type activities to get your students into section 20. You don't need to do all of them, right? Keep your eye on the time and maybe just do 1 or 2 if you feel that it's going to be too much. Because you really want the bulk of your time to be dedicated to finding and discussing each of the 6 foundational principles. And the way that I suggested you do that was with the following study guide handout. So matching the theme of creating order, it invites your students to unscramble the words that represent the 6 foundations with a list of verses that will help them to recognize those words. Give your students enough time to study the verses, unscramble the words, and then have a short class discussion about each one. And for thoughts and insights regarding those 6 principles, you could watch the insight video. I give you plenty of ideas there. But a discussion question that should be asked for each of the principles as you review them would be, why do you think that is such an important foundation for the church? Important enough to be included in the Constitution. A quote, the following from Dallin H. Oaks. Despite the good works that can be accomplished without a church, the fullness of doctrine and its saving and exalting ordinances are available only in the restored church. In addition, church attendance gives us the strength and enhancement of faith that come from associating with other believers and worshiping together with those who are also striving to stay on the covenant path and be better disciples of Christ. A take it to heart question. Which one of those foundations are you particularly grateful for, and why? And I will go and do question. What is something that you could do this week to show your gratitude for Christ's organized church? Suggestions? Sustain your leaders, study the doctrine of the church, fulfill your duty and church callings and responsibilities, center your life on Christ by following his example, reflect and write about why the church matters to you. Our takeaway slide reminds our students of the 6 foundational principles of the church and how firm a foundation it stands on. You might even consider singing that hymn at the conclusion of the lesson. Also, be sure to bear your personal witness and gratitude for the church in your life and how it's made a difference. We want to emphasize to our students the blessings that not only come from the gospel, but from the organization of the church itself. It's a message that we need to hear often in a world that often dismisses or criticizes organized faith. All right, lesson number 2, stay active, also from section 20. The truth, God works great works through us. So get to work. The fire in the bones for this lesson burns from the inspiration that comes from realizing that we are instruments in God's hands, partners with him, capable of accomplishing his marvelous work together with him. As teachers, we get a chance to help them recognize that God works through them. Being needed is exciting and motivating. Help them to see that the Lord's work isn't just happening to them or around them, but that it's happening through them. And we also want them to understand the importance of staying engaged, actively fulfilling their roles in the church, with the promise that if they do, they will not fall. And the object that you're going to want to procure for this lesson is called a gyroscope. They're available on Amazon, and I'll provide you with a link where you could purchase one if you're interested in using this idea for the icebreaker. And the way that you approach it is that you pull it out and you ask if anybody knows how it works. And then you demonstrate it, which is you wrap a string around the center bar and then you pull really hard, which gets it's spinning super, super fast. And then it's cool. You can balance it on your finger or even on a piece of string. And it moves up and down this little tiny, piece of string. It stays up. But what's going to happen as soon as it begins to slow down or to stop spinning? It falls. As long as it's moving, though, it won't. And so then you could ask, what could the gyroscope teach us about serving in the church? And they'll get it. The more that we serve, the more active we are, the less likely we are to fall. That motion, that movement can keep us balanced on the straight and narrow path. And the gyroscope illustrates just how narrow that path can be, and we can still stay upright and moving. And I just spend a minute as the teacher presenting the ideas in Doctrine and Covenants 1844 and in Exodus, like I explained in the Insight video, just to help them see that God works his marvelous work through us, and that he promises us that he'll be with us as we do so. And I find that serves as a great lead-in to the search activity. And the search activity is to look for all the virtuous verbs, as opposed to the vile verbs that we discussed a couple of weeks ago. And you could do this by simply asking them to scan through verses 38 through 59, marking and sharing all of the verbs that they see are associated with priesthood duty. Or you could make it into a bit of a game if you liked. And since we're talking about verbs here, you could turn it into a charades activity. You divide your class up into two teams. And up on the board or on the wall, there's going to be a bunch of cards that are taped up. You call up a student from one of the teams and you allow them to choose one of the cards. Now, they're going to turn the card over, and on the back is going to be printed one of the virtuous verbs or verb phrases from verses 38 through 59. And I'm going to make those cards with all of the words on them available in the lesson materials this week. And you'll just need to print them and cut them out. And be sure to tell the teams that some of these are verb phrases and not just single words, but that they're welcome to look in verses 38 to 59 for ideas and help. And the selected student's job is to act out the verb without using any words, just actions, charades. And if they can get their team to guess the verb in 30 seconds or less, then their team gets a point. And then the other team gets a chance to do it. And back and forth through all of the words, or through as many as you feel you have time to do. If you see that you're running out of time or it's taking too long, you could just stop the game and show them the remaining words. Now, some of the verbs are going to be harder than others, so they should be expecting that. I imagine it's going to be much easier to get your team to guess the word baptize than it will be to get them to guess the word administer. But that's what makes it fun and a bit of a challenge. Between each round, you should invite your students to mark that word or verb phrase in their scriptures, so that by the end of the activity, they're going to have a good visual, a good idea of all of the things that the Lord invites us to do to stay active in the church. For a video idea, which is also going to serve as our quote for this lesson, you could share the following from a talk given by President Gordon B. Hinckley. It's a great quote that echoes many of the insights that this section of the Doctrine and Covenants highlights. Invite them to ponder the following question as they watch. What does President Hinckley want us to understand about our callings and responsibilities in the church? A take it to heart question. What's your favorite virtuous verb, and why do you think God wants us to do that? Or you may consider asking, how have you seen God strengthen you or somebody that you know when serving in a calling or responsibility? And for what I will go and do, you could get each of your students a Post-it note and invite them to pick one of the virtuous verbs and to write it on the note. And then you encourage them to place that sticky note in a conspicuous place for the next week and invite them to pray for opportunities to act on that verb and to become more active in that particular thing. Our takeaway slide then reminds them to act, to stay moving like the gyroscope. Encourage your students to apply the virtuous verbs daily in their life with the promise that if they do, they'll never fall. Now our third and final lesson, follow the prophet from section 21. Truth, if we give heed to the prophet's words and commandments in patience and faith, we will be given strength against evil and receive a mighty blessing. For the fire in the bones, we've got an opportunity here in section 21 to instill in our students a sense of gratitude and love for the brethren, to help them realize just how fortunate we are in the church to have such incredible disciples and faithful examples as our leaders. And good leadership is really hard to come by these days, and we're spoiled with it in the church. In a world that's filled with confusion and shifting values and spiritual dangers around every corner, our students need to know that God has placed watchmen on the towers, prophets who can see dangers that we just can't see. Our lesson has the potential to fortify their testimonies and deepen their trust in the Lord's chosen servants. So I encourage you to seek to teach it with purpose and power and faith. For an object, a pair of binoculars might be a good thing to accompany this lesson. At some point, you're going to want to point to the binoculars and ask them what they're used for. The answer being that they help us to see things that are far away, or that are unclear, or that are hidden from view. And then you could ask, how is that similar to the role of a prophet? And I believe that the prophets have been given the gift of being able to see things that we can't see, or that we can't see very clearly, because the consequences of them are so far away. God has given the prophets a set of spiritual binoculars, so to speak, to help them see things beyond our limited spiritual comprehension. And that's one of the reasons they're called seers. And for the icebreaker, I like to tell the story that I shared in the Insight video from Elder Joseph B. Worthland's General Conference talk about the elders in the island village warning the inhabitants of a coming tsunami, because they could see the signs of it before it ever hit. And because the people heeded the warnings of the elders, they were saved. And then direct your students to section 21 to look for the date that this section was given, and make the point that this was the very first official revelation given to the organized church on the very same date that it was established. And what's the main theme of the section? Follow the prophet. Couched in the language of a commandment, even in verse 4. Thou shalt give heed to all his words and commandments. Now, the search activity is an individual thinking map that invites your students to study section 21 with the following 3 ideas in mind. 1, find all the different titles that prophets have in section 21. 2, find all the instructions that were given as far as prophets are concerned. And 3, find all of the promised blessings that we receive for following the prophets. And for each of those categories, there's an additional taking it to heart type question that accompanies it right below it. And those questions are, which one of the titles stands out most to you, and how have you seen our Latter-day Prophets fulfill that role? The next one, what is a specific counsel of the prophets that you're grateful for? And third, what mighty blessings have you received for following the prophets? Now give your students enough time to fill out the sheet, and then just spend the rest of the lesson going over and discussing their answers. A video that you might consider showing is entitled, Why Do We Have Prophets? It gives a brief overview of the doctrine of prophets and revelation. And as your students watch, encourage them to take note of at least one blessing that the video mentions that can come from heeding the words of the prophets. For a quote, President Russell M. Nelson once said, "It is precisely because we do care deeply about all of God's children that we proclaim his truth. We may not always tell people what they want to hear. Prophets are rarely popular, but we will always teach the truth." For and I will go and do, what is one thing that President Nelson or another church leader has asked us to do recently? How can you apply it in your life this week? And with that question, you may want to be prepared by reviewing the prophet's talk from the most recent General Conference to remind your students of some of the things that the prophet has challenged us to do most recently. Give them time to ponder if they've really sought to apply the prophet's challenge, the prophet's invitations. And the takeaway slide reminds us of the first given commandment of the organized Church of Jesus Christ. Give heed to all of the words and commandments of the prophet with patience and with faith. And in conclusion, be sure to bear your personal witness of the blessings that you've received for heeding the prophet's counsels and your gratitude for their inspired guidance. And that's going to conclude this supplemental teaching activities video. I hope it helps you. I hope it helps you to find the fire in the bones for this week's lessons. That being said, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for watching. Now get out there and teach with power.